welcome in to the Third Round Reversal Podcast, Episode 4. Brett Malamud here with Zach Malamud. Zach, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Ready for another great episode.
All right. We've been diving in division by division, and we've got a few here, the NFC West and the NFC South. Let's start out in San Francisco as we take on the NFC West. And a little bit of quarterback controversy. Not quite sure who the starter is going to be, with Brock Purdy going down towards the end of last season and Trey Lance, the rookie, going down at the beginning of last season. Zach, let's go through the San Francisco 49ers.
Yeah, and you mentioned it, Brett. It's the question still is there of who's going to be the starting quarterback, whoever's going to be healthy for the start of the season. Brock Purdy with an elbow injury, Trey Lance with an ankle injury, and they also added Sam Darnold in the offseason. But Brock Purdy, he played 6 games last year after Jimmy G went down and broke his foot. He was QB9 in those 6 games. A very good player and really impactful in fantasy. Brock Purdy was. As for Trey Lance, right now, it's definitely a weird situation. In Dynasty, you're going to hold on to him right now just because he's a rookie, still got a lot of time. He could end up being the starter. It was his offense at the start of last season. I think it's going to be Trey Lance's offense if he's healthy. So right now, you got to hold on to him. I'm pretty sure, like I said, that Trey Lance is going to be QB1. As for Sam Darnold, he played 6 games last year for Carolina, was QB17. He's got to be the third guy in line. I don't think he's on a fantasy radar this season. Maybe 1 or 2 games. You maybe have him in Dynasty just in case Purdy or Lance is not ready yet. But I think Lance and Purdy are right on the border of starting quarterbacks in redraft if they're starting, just based on how many weapons there are in this San Francisco offense. Kyle Shanahan is going to come up with a bunch of different things, and both of them are mobile. They're mobile quarterbacks that could get out of the pocket, and you'll get rushing out of that in fantasy. As for, let's move on to the running backs. Christian McCaffrey, he was running back 1 in all of fantasy football after joining San Fran in the middle of the season. He had the most receiving yards and averaged 21.7 fantasy points per game. Astounding numbers from Christian McCaffrey. In terms of Elijah Mitchell, I draft him as a stash guy for now. It's Christian McCaffrey's backfield. If Christian McCaffrey goes down, we hope not. But if he does, then Eli Mitchell is going to be the number 1 guy. But anything after that, I think he's a stash guy for now, especially in redraft. In Dynasty, I'd look to see what you can get for Eli Mitchell. There's a lot of value out there, especially because he's that stash guy behind Christian McCaffrey. If you can find a good value trade, definitely look to trade Elijah Mitchell. Let's move on to the wide receivers, though. Brandon Ayuk, he finished wide receiver 15. And before Deebo Samuel got hurt towards the end of last season, he was wide receiver 23. I think they're both wide receiver 2s going into this season. And looking at tight end, George Kittle, the number 2 tight end behind Travis Kelce, in my opinion. He had 11 touchdowns. I think that's great numbers, exactly what you want in this San Francisco offense. 21 plays over 20 yards. I mean, those numbers speak for itself. He had only the 8th most receptions by a tight end. But if he gets those long plays, and like I said, 21 plays over 20-plus yards, I mean, Kittle's going to have another great year.
Yeah, with Kittle, it was a career-high 11 touchdowns. He did only average 51 yards per game, though, which is the fewest since his rookie year in 2017. But I still think, yes, of course, with the upside and the way that the tight end market goes in fantasy, you have those couple guys that are up towards the top, the high-volume guys, and I think he's one of those borderline top 5 guys just based on the touchdown upside alone. But, you know, you can argue that he might not get that top 5 just based on who's playing quarterback, and we're kind of unsure about that. Back to the receivers, though, you make a great point with Deebo and with Brandon Ayuk. Deebo had a 25.4% target share, which put him in 19th. He also had 5 deep targets, which put him at 108th, and 12 red looks, which was 36th as a wide receiver. So for me, he's probably going to be overvalued just based on his name. So maybe he's a guy that you can almost sell to try to get one of those pieces that's on the up and up if you have him. He's 27 years old. I think they're probably going to win a lot of Christian McCaffrey this year. So, and again, there's that uncertainty of who is actually playing quarterback. And the fact that they brought in Christian McCaffrey also doesn't exactly help when it comes to Deebo's rushing ability, which they really used him a ton before McCaffrey got there. And that kind of added that value for him. So for me, it's almost like I wouldn't call him a flex. I'd call him probably a wide receiver 3, and he has the upside to be a wide receiver 2. With Brandon Ayuk, he's a different story. He had 8 touchdowns, which was 11th among wide receivers, 113 targets, over 1,000 receiving yards. He's more intriguing to me because just of the fact that you can get him a couple rounds later and probably get the same value that you're getting for Deebo. So he's probably a higher end, wide receiver 3, same thing, but that wide receiver 2 upside just based on that he scores a lot of touchdowns. And so that's a guy I probably would try to buy in Dynasty as opposed to selling Deebo before his value goes up later this year. As far as McCaffrey goes, roll him out. He's your running back 1. I mean, no questions asked. And as far as the rest of the list goes, you have Darian Price, you have Jordan Mason, Juszczyk. I'm probably out on all 3 of them. It's, Elijah Mitchell's the handcuff guy, and you grab him just in case of that injury. Those other guys won't really make an impact unless McCaffrey goes down. And then we get to the quarterback, which I think is the big question mark. Brock Purdy's been not practicing, obviously, because he's probably not going to get back until August at the earliest, right in time for training camp. And with Trey Lance, he's been getting the quarterback 1 reps over Sam Darnold in the OTAs. With Lance, it's an interesting case because he played the first game in the monsoon against the Chicago Bears, didn't have that high of an output, and then he got hurt in week 2. So he's unknown. He's a former 3rd overall pick, high value sleeper with legs. He's got legs, and we kind of saw him do that week 2 before he went down. I think that if he can replicate that, he's probably a good candidate down the road. So he's probably a guy you have to hold in Dynasty, of course, because he's only 23. I'm probably not selling him right now. Just based on the fact that he is an unknown, but he could potentially become something really big. I think it's a little too early to figure out what exactly his redraft value would be. For me, if it's Purdy, I'm probably not taking Purdy in a redraft. He's probably not a candidate for me, but at the same time, he's probably one of those like quarterback 20s, right thereabouts. If it's Lance, there's the upside that it's higher. I just feel like and what Trey Lance brings, at least what he did in college and what he brought through the draft process, I think he has a higher floor than Brock Purdy does have.
I agree with you. I think, your Purdy take, I probably agree with it, probably around quarterback 20. However, like I said, in those 6 games, he was quarterback 9. Of course, there's a lot of other quarterbacks and things that go on. But in this offense, he has every weapon you can ask for. So those guys are going to get him his points. Like I said, Christian McCaffrey had the most receiving yards of any running back in fantasy football when he was in San Francisco. So looking at that, Brock Purdy's going to get those points from that. It's going to be a different story if Lance is there as well. The rushing upside of Lance is a little bit bigger than Purdy's, in my opinion. But, Brett, I think we're back to Christian McCaffrey being the consensus number 1 overall pick in fantasy football. We took a year off. We had Jonathan Taylor. I think Christian McCaffrey definitely took his spot back at number 1.
Yeah, I think that's pretty solid. As long as McCaffrey's healthy, he's the running back 1. No questions asked. And unfortunately, though, for him, the question mark has always been his health. As long as he stays healthy and he's out there, he's number 1. I don't think there's any real question.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
So now we have a running back with a question mark, and it's Kenneth Walker. As we go to the Seattle Seahawks, Kenneth Walker came an amazing start to his rookie campaign, and then he went down with a season-ending injury. And now it's interesting because they bring in Zach Charbonnet, and we're not totally sure on what their workloads will be.
Yeah, it's definitely a weird situation in Seattle. Of course, the ceiling of Charbonnet is very high. A really talented player coming out of UCLA. But you mentioned Walker's injury. He missed 2 games and was still running back 18, over 1,000 yards, 21 rushes, over 20 yards. That was the most of any running back. He's a really good RB2. I think even with Charbonnet there, of course, there's still a question of who's going to get the job. I think it's Walker's job right now until Charbonnet ends up taking it away from him. But right now, I think a solid RB2 Walker is, because, I mean, he showed last year over 1,000 yards and some big playability. He's definitely a guy to look out for if he is that lead back in Seattle. As for the quarterback, Geno Smith, what a surprise last year. He finished quarterback 5. I mean, I think he's on the border right now of quarterback 1, quarterback 2. I would definitely go there just based on the numbers that he was able to put up last year. And they've only added players. They didn't lose anybody. They only added guys to that offense. So looking at that, I mean, it's a great year for Geno. I'd probably take him as just on the fringe of a starting quarterback 1 in redraft leagues, maybe a 12-team league. Then he's the quarterback 1 for you, maybe the 12th or 11th quarterback taken. Let's move to wide receivers, though. And Tyler Lockett was a beast last year. He finished wide receiver 13. DK Metcalf, wide receiver 16. Both these guys, I think they're also wide receiver 2s. I mean, you can go either way. They're just going to take targets away from each other. That's the one thing that you'll have to worry about. But Lockett had 3 more touchdowns than Metcalf, but Metcalf had a ton more targets. That definitely goes with the big playability of Tyler Lockett. It's going to get a lot more deep balls than a guy like DK Metcalf that'll get some slants and try and work his way up the field. But the big acquisition in the offseason, they drafted Jackson Smith-Njigba out of Ohio State. He's the top wide receiver prospect, in my opinion, and definitely should be the number 1 wide receiver taken in Dynasty. I would probably take him a little bit later in redraft. Probably he's a bench guy for now, just based on, Lockett as well as Metcalf are going to get a ton of targets this year. As for tight end, they got Noah Fant. He was tight end 17 last year. There's lots of receivers. Noah Fant's a backup in my mind.
Yeah, totally agree on Fant. I think he's a non-factor. They're probably going to end up running more 3 wide receiver sets than they will with 2 tight end sets. So I really think that with, Disley, Fant, probably leave them on waivers. If you need a streamer later in the season, we'll get to that when we get to it. And if Fant is, a viable option, then, you might be able to pick them up then. But as far as the receivers go, I think that to me is, one of the big questions here. And obviously we'll get to the running backs in a second. But as far as who is wide receiver number 2, because I think it's pretty solid that DK is going to be number 1. But as far as Lockett versus Njigba, I'm not really sure who's get more targets, because Lockett might come out when JSN's in, and JSN might go in when Lockett's out. I'm curious what happens when there's only 2 receivers on the field and which guy that is. As far as Lockett goes, he was 2nd in the league in open rate behind Deion Johnson, finished as a top 20 receiver. And so, he's probably still a high-end, wide receiver 3, if not low-end wide receiver 2. He does have that deep ball upside. We've seen that. And, it's one of those guys that if he strikes early, probably is a guy that I would personally sell if I had him in a dynasty league, just based on, what the future looks like out there. As far as JSN goes, I think he's going to end up as the number 2 receiver in this offense, just based on draft stock alone. I think he's going to be more volume-based. I think he's going to get more targets. I think he's going to get more catches as a result. If he can leak in the DK's touchdown numbers, I think it's probably a pick that in draft leagues, you could probably get him around the 8th through the 10th round, depending on where your league values him. He's probably going right around there. I also think he's, as you said before, he's the top receiver for me in dynasty drafts. I'm not sure how much longer Geno will actually be there. And obviously they're going to then look to replace the quarterback position. And, if they go younger, we'll see what happens. But, for the meantime, I think that right now he is the number one receiver in dynasty drafts. As DK goes, though, I think he's a very high-end wide receiver, too, with potential of wide receiver 1 numbers. He was only wide receiver number 17, which is amazing because he really was – it was unbelievable in the red zone. He was the second player. He ranked wide receiver 2 in red zone target share. I think that if that continues and he continues to be a favorite target for Geno when they get to the red zone, that's where you can see those wide receiver 1 numbers slip in. So DK, if you want to draft DK, you're going to have to go up and get him. As far as the running backs go, though, it's Kenneth Walker and it's actually, and I don't see DJ Dallas even having any sort of impact at all. I think Kenneth Walker is really going to be the guy, and Zach Charbonnet, he'll mix in here and there. I still think that Kenneth Walker is going to be the guy who is run show. He was running back 8 from week 6 to 17 after Rashad Penny was placed on the IR, and he was also running back 9 when he missed those games. If you remove those 2 games that he did miss, and I did misspeak before, he did come back after the week 13 and 14 injury. He averaged 16.4 fantasy points per game, which would have made him the running back 8 in points per game. So Charbonnet, second round, it's a little iffy. His specialty, though, is receiving. And so, there's the question mark of whether they're going to use the receiving back in that regard. To me, it's still, I would take Kenneth Walker. I wouldn't panic sell him if you have him in Dynasty. I know that a lot of people are doing that right now. Don't panic sell him. Just ride the wave. And so with Charbonnet, again, Pete Carroll's history is interesting, though. The team drafted Rashad Penny in the first round in 2018. But they also picked a guy in the 7th round who was their leading rusher in 2018, 2019, and 2020. That was Carson. So if you're looking at picking Charbonnet in your rookie draft, he's probably your back end first, early second. Just then, I think his value is still there. I think he will get his touches. Plain and simple. He'll score touchdowns just based on, screen passes and what they can draw up to get him involved. That said, I think in redrafts, he's probably a good mid-round sleeper just for the upside potential. I think it's going to be one of those like a Kareem Hunt almost, where who's going to be running between the backs, who's going to be running between the tackles. But when they need that off chance, they can use that 1-2 punch. A. Dillon kind of did that a little bit in Green Bay as well, where he wasn't valued so far below AJ or Aaron Jones. And I think that you'll kind of see that kind of a value there. And then we finish up with Geno Smith, who won the Comeback Player of the Year. He led the NFL completion percentage. I mean, I don't know where it came from. We're both located in New York, and we watched him all the years for the Jets and struggling and all of that. And he was amazing. I mean, but it was nobody saw him coming. People thought Drew Lock was going to be the star heading into last season. There was that battle during training camp, and then they named Geno the starter. So, unbelievable story. He finished quarterback 5, as you said before. And, while it might not be wise to bet on him to repeat that performance, I still agree with you that he's probably one of those low-end quarterback 1s, high-end quarterback 2, probably the reasonable expectation. He's a very strong quarterback if you have him as your second quarterback, though, in Superflex. And then if you grabbed him in Dynasty, listen, I grabbed him on waivers, which was insane. And so, ride the wave. Just ride the wave. He's 32 years old. If you get an offer on a trade that's just ridiculous, then you have to take it. Superflex obviously has that kind of a value for a quarterback, but as far as it goes, ride the wave with Geno.
Yeah, completely agree. That one thing you said, I'm curious about. Lockett had the most touchdowns. He had 9 touchdowns as a wide receiver. You said you think Smith and Jigba is going to end up maybe taking that number 2 spot at wide receiver in Seattle. I mean, I'm a little, I'm just a little confused of just like Lockett's value He had 9 touchdowns. He was probably Geno's favorite target to throw the ball and get touchdowns in the end. I don't know, how far do you think he's going to drop? Or is Smith and Jigba just going to take a big jump up?
Yeah, well, again, I think that with JSN and his volume, I think he's going to be more of a volume receiver rather than Lockett. Lockett will get his big strikes like he always does, but it was just a few seasons ago that Lockett was only getting big strikes, and he was only known for, half of his fantasy points, I believe 2 years ago, came from 6-yard bombs. And so, when you take that into account, and then you also factor in the case that JSN was a first-round pick, and that Pete Carroll's not going to just burn a first-round pick. He's going to use him. And so I think that that's where the difference lies. And then, of course, there's DK, which DK is your number one guy. So I think that they're going to try to, again, I don't know that Lockett will dip that much because, again, he's probably a low-end wide receiver 2 at the very best. If he can do his very best, he's probably there. But he's probably a wide receiver 3 for me, just based on the fact that JSN is there. But again, I think that they're playing all 3 wide receiver sets.
Understandable. All right, let's move on to the Rams.
All righty, so we go on to Rams, and I mean, Zach, it was just absolutely, it was a cluster. For most of the season, Cam Akers, his whole issue for most of the season, Matt Stafford went down, Cooper Kupp got hurt. And so, it's kind of a rebuilding year for them, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Stafford played until week 11, then went out with injury last season. And in those 11 games, this guy was only quarterback 25. He had the top wide receiver in Cooper Kupp for those first 7 or 8 games that Cooper Kupp was healthy. And he was only quarterback 25. I think he's a backup. I mean, quarterback 2, probably in that 20 range, I would say. I wouldn't be running to get him just based on he has one huge target, and that's Cooper Kupp. The last 3 weeks of the season at running back, Cam Akers was running back 2. What a comeback after he got benched. We didn't know if he was going to play. Oh, it was a waste of a draft pick. People probably dropped him after he wasn't playing. But the last 3 weeks of the season, running back 2, I mean, that's a great sign coming into this season. I still won't draft him too early because I was one of those people that drafted Cam Akers early. I know you did the same, Brett.
Yep.
I wouldn't be running to get him, but I think he's a low-end running back 2 right now. Maybe middle of the pack in running back 2. I probably that's where he is. But as we speak, Kyron Williams and rookie Zach Evans, they have them right behind them. And that might turn into something else. We never know with Sean McVay. He could throw in whoever's at running back. He could come in and take some of Cam Akers' touches there. So I wouldn't be running to get Cam Akers. But looking at the wide receiver room, 8 healthy weeks. Cooper Kupp, wide receiver 2, like I talked about. He's going to get a ton of receptions. His value really just depends on his health. But there's really nobody else in this wide receiver room that has a ton of value. Van Jefferson, Ben Skoranek, Tutu Atwell, nothing really crazy when it comes to fantasy there. I'd maybe Skoranek, a late round flyer, because I think he's probably the wide receiver 2. I think Van Jefferson's more of a deep threat. Skoranek will get his touches from Matt Stafford, probably a late round flyer at best. But the other guy is Tyler Higbee at tight end. He finished tight end 6. I think he's a low end tight end 1 to start the season, just based on he did have some good touches and a lot of receptions that made him tight end 6, but a little bit low on touchdown production. I think a lot of that's going to go to the running backs as well as Cooper Kupp. So Higbee, like I said, low end tight end 1.
Yeah, for me, Higbee is, he's an iffy for me. His first time of the year didn't come till week 15. So to me, when it comes to the tight end position, you kind of accept those volume guys, which I just spoke about before, those top 5 guys. You're really just kind of touchdown dependent on a lot of those guys. And for me, week 15 not getting a touchdown, that to me makes him a low end backup. I think personally, because I think that they're really going to go into the run, and Cooper Kupp obviously he's a big factor. So let's get into receivers here. Kupp was great. He had that injury, and he's probably a high-end wide receiver one, but I would be cautious just based on that we are not sure really what's the long-term future of Matt Stafford. Whether Stafford will come back. He had a spinal cord contusion that ended his season. That's a serious injury. So for me, I'm probably not going to pick Kupp just based on the fact that you have to factor a very high first-round pick to get him. But I can understand guys who do. He led all wide receivers in points per game with 18.4 points per game. And he had the second highest target share in the NFL. So for me, I think the Kupp is going to be good, but at the same time, I would caution just based on, they're Stetson Bennett right now. And he's obviously an unknown rookie. So as far as the rest of the room goes, with the exception of Puka Nacua, who I would say is probably worth a rookie flyer, towards the end of your rookie draft, I would say I'm probably staying away from the rest of them. I'm ignoring the rest of the room. Sorry, Rams fans, but that's just the kind of year that I really think that they're going to have. And we spoke about Cam Akers. I'm still buying on him. I think that for some reason I just can't get away from taking Cam Akers. And yes, we both picked him way too early last year. I have him in Dynasty. You could probably buy him for cheap right now in Dynasty, which is funny because he was, again, like you said, the running back 2 during the last 6 weeks of the season. He was benched in week 1. He was almost cut in week 3. This is a guy who came back to the team and just dominated. He absolutely dominated. And yes, Matt Stafford was not there. Baker Mayfield was the quarterback. It was a cluster, you know what? And so to me, yes, I think that Cam Akers is an interesting one. He could go either way. But as far as Dynasty goes, he's only 23. So buy him. Why wouldn't you buy a 23-year-old running back that you could get on the cheap? To me, though, he's on a contract year. So they're just going to run him. I think that this is an offense that is going to run through Cam Akers. And it's, if I said that a year ago, it would have been great. If I said that about half a year ago, you would have told me I was crazy. But to me, I think he has the potential of being a workhorse. I'm going to start him right now probably as one of those mid to low running back 2s. And there's the potential that changes and becomes a higher thing. With Zach Evans, he's never really been a workhorse. And so I don't really see him eat in too much to that. He was picked 215 in the draft. I'd probably would keep him on waivers just in redraft leagues. If you are in a rookie draft, you maybe take a flyer on him late, just based on that he was a good running back. He just never was able to be a workhorse. Even after he transferred, he couldn't really tie it down. It was a freshman getting a lot of the carries in there. And then that's the same thing with Kyron. And yes, we don't know what Sean McVay is thinking. And Kyron Williams kind of came on a little bit towards that, where Cam Akers was not with the team and any of that. So Kyron Williams could mix in here and there. Zach Evans could mix in here and there, but I really think that they use Cam Akers as that workhorse. And then as Matt Stafford goes, yes, quarterback 25. He threw 25 interceptions in his last 26 regular season games. And so for me, he's on the down. He's on just that slide down, and he had 10 touchdowns only in 9 games. And so, he's probably one of those low end quarterback 2s. Probably, like I spoke up before, have in Dynasty in a Superflex league, you might be able to sell him just based on the value of quarterbacks alone. And so you might be able to get them for him. But keep an eye on Stetson Bennett just because of the health perspective. He might be worth a speculative stash just in the very deepest of Dynasty Superflex leagues.
Yeah, 2 things I agree with. I definitely would look to sell Stafford right now, especially in Dynasty. The age is getting up there. Of course, the injuries are coming. I think right now is probably the best possible time to sell Stafford, just based on, you're not going to sell him if he's playing well. Right now, he's hurt. Obviously, quarterback value, like you said, Brett, is very high in Dynasty. Try and sell him. Try and see what you can get for him. And if you could get something good, then all of a sudden you can kind of restart your quarterback room with Stafford there. The other thing you said about Cooper Kupp, I'd kind of hold and wait and see right now. Well, obviously, more information will come out in August, so you'll see what the deal is at quarterback. But I wouldn't be rushing to get Cooper Kupp right now. As we mentioned, Matt Stafford may not be fully healthy. It might be all in Stetson Bennett's hand.
Yeah, you have a top 5 pick and redraft, and your draft is coming up pretty quickly. It's tough to really factor Cooper Kupp in as like.
Yeah, completely agree.
Alrighty, so now we go to another quarterback who's injured, and in Arizona, it's Kyler Murray. He tore his ACL on December 12th, may miss as much as half of this season, but then there's some optimism that, it could be, just a couple weeks in. So a little bit of a question mark. But as far as the running backs and receivers go, Zach, take us through the Arizona Cardinals.
So this is a really weird situation because obviously Kyler Murray got hurt. I'm going to be honest, in Dynasty, I try and see what you can get for Kyler Murray right now. Of course, the injury, they're in a rebuild. Obviously they lost Hopkins. They released him. They're trying to figure things out. They're not that great of a team right now. If you can get some great value for Kyler Murray, why not take it? I mean, obviously he's young and yes, there's potential, but I feel like you can get somebody better than Kyler Murray in the future and see what kind of value you can get right now in Dynasty for a guy like Kyler. I wouldn't be drafting Colt McCoy in redraft. Would definitely grab him in Dynasty. He's probably going to be quarterback 1. We'll see how long that is for based on Kyler's injury and if he's coming back or not. When it comes to running backs, Connor hurt his ankle mid-season last year, and he came back. The guy was running back 4 in the last 8 games of the season. I wouldn't feel too comfortable with him as a running back 1, but he's definitely a high-end running back 2. He's definitely got the value. They're going to rely on him a ton this year, especially if they don't have a fully healthy quarterback. I mean, looking at the wide receiver room, Hollywood Brown, before he got hurt, he was wide receiver 5. Without a solid QB, though, I think Hollywood's probably a flex option at best. It's very hit or miss right now with the wide receiver room. Rondell Moore and the rest, I think, and the rest of the wide receiver room, probably boom or bust. Michael Wilson's a rookie there. So is and Greg Dortch, was there last year. Coming back for another year, they also added Zach Pascal from Indianapolis. It's very hit or miss, boom or bust with this wide receiver room. Not really too many guys you can trust. Ertz, he got an ACL and MCL injury in week 10. I mean, if Ertz is there, he's a low-end tight end 1, but I don't know if he's going to be back. There's still a question mark if he's going to be there. As for Trey McBride, the backup, I think he's a backup in redraft, especially if they don't have a quarterback. Even without Ertz, I still think he's a backup. Not a ton of value there at tight end.
Yeah, and I think it really starts with who's playing quarterback just for this entire team, and with the exception of James Conner. I'll start out with the tight ends here. You mentioned Ertz goes down. He was a top 5 tight end, though, when he went down after the first 10 weeks. And so torn ACL, torn MCL, and over the final 7 games, Trey McBride was targeted 35 times. He had 25 catches, 234 yards, and a score. So I'm kind of curious how they respond as a team to putting McBride in if Ertz can't go, and trying to get him some more work. That said, as far as Ertz goes, there's probably going to be a huge discount on him from what his normal value is, just based on his health. He might not be ready, all of those. To me, it's a late round flyer, only if they're your backup tight end. Both of them. I would both of them probably are your backup tight end. Ertz, if Ertz comes back and he's healthy, he's a good backup to have. And so I might take a late round flyer on him, probably not taking a late round flyer on McBride if Ertz is healthy, though. As far as the receivers go, Marquise Hollywood-Brown, without Hopkins there, though, weeks 1 to 6, because remember, Hopkins was suspended. He was the wide receiver 7 in fantasy. He had a ton of usage, ton of targets. Now, the quarterback situation, again, makes him probably one of those mid-level wide receiver 2s, I would say. And there's that sleeper potential that if Kyler comes back, you're talking about a guy that he threw to all the time. He could finish as a top 12 receiver. Like, he has that potential. I'm not sure that he's going to hit that. He's probably in that second wide receiver. I wouldn't draft him as my top wide receiver. You're probably, if you're drafting a second wide receiver, he'll probably go to that like middle of pack group of backup wide receivers. And so, buy him if you haven't, though, because his value is decreased because Kyler is not healthy right now. And so his value took a hit in Dynasty. So probably a guy you can buy low on. As far as the rest of them go, Rondale Moore, he's a good flex option. I don't know that he's more than that, though. And then as far as redraft goes, you're probably taking like a late round sleeper on him. The rest of them, I would say, are probably waivers for me, with the exception of Michael Wilson, who, again, that's one of those late round flyers you might take in one of your rookie drafts. But I think it's Hollywood or bust as far as the receivers go. As far as the running backs go, James Conner, baby. Running back 4 overall in the last 8 games. He had 17 fantasy points per game. And that was overachieving where he was supposed to be running back 10 on his expected output. So he played 90% of the team's snaps in those 5 of the last 8 games. To me, this is a contract year where they are going to run him wild. So he's an RB2 for me. He has an out at the end, or the team has an out at the end of this year. So they're going to just run him wild. He's RB2 with the potential that he turns into something way more, because I think that, especially if Kyler misses half the year, James Conner is going to be getting 20, 25, even upwards of 30 carries for some of those weeks. And then as far as the quarterback goes, I'm not taking Colt McCoy. Just plain and simple. I'm not going to take Colt McCoy in any draft, redraft, dynasty. Sorry, it's not happening. I don't see the value there. But I'm a little intrigued about Kyler just because of his value is when he's there. So his value is going to dip a lot. He's still a good running quarterback. So he probably could be bought low. Obviously, if you're in a super flex, you're probably not getting him for that much of a discount because of his age and the fact that he is one of the more dominant quarterbacks when he's healthy. But as far as redraft goes, maybe he's a guy that I would target if you have one of those higher end guys like Mahomes, Allen, Lamar, Justin Fields, one of those guys, and he's your backup because, when you look at Mahomes' schedule, he has a bye in week 10. Allen, Lamar, Fields, they have week 13 buys. So you would assume that Kyler would be healthy by then. And then all of a sudden your fill-in guy is the potential top 5 quarterback, Kyler Murray, of course, granted that he's healthy. So, we'll learn more as the summer progresses, but maybe a guy to just keep an eye on as a potential really good backup for you.
Yeah, it definitely something to look out for. Obviously, you'll hear more about Kyler's health as the season gets closer, but definitely a really good option as a backup. Especially if he's coming back this year. Like we said, there's optimism in the Cardinals camp that Kyler will be able to come back this season. I'm a little bit more down on Hollywood Brown than you are. I think he's probably a flex option. I think he's a wide receiver 3, just based on with him as that number 1 guy, teams are going to prepare. Okay, we have to guard Hollywood Brown. He's really the only guy there. They'll let Rondale Moore get his targets. They'll let Greg Dortch get his targets. And especially if Zach Ertz is not healthy, they'll let Trey McBride get his targets. Hollywood Brown is so dangerous. I feel like teams will be more likely and defenses will be more likely to put extra guys on Hollywood Brown. That's why I put him probably wide receiver 3. He's definitely still an option in your starting lineup, but I'm a little bit more down. I'd take probably 2 wide receivers ahead of him if I was in that situation.
Yeah, and it's fair. And I think that he would be a good third option completely. I just think with the upside of the target share and things like that, if you're getting Cooper Kupp level targets, you're probably going to get some catches on those. And so that to me is the only reason why I can see the upside of picking a Hollywood Brown. And it's a guy that, I'm not going to reach too far ahead in my draft, but I might reach around.
Yeah, definitely fair. Let's move on to the NFC South.
All righty. So, big story in the NFC South. Tom Brady's not there anymore. Tom Brady rides off into the sunset, and his replacement, none other than Baker Mayfield. So, it's a little interesting out there in Tampa Bay. Zach, take us through the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
This is one of the teams that probably I think had like the biggest downgrade from last year to this year. I mean, it's a sneaky find in Baker Mayfield. The one problem, he is horrendous when it comes to accuracy. I wouldn't be drafting him until probably really late in redraft, back end of backup quarterbacks. And if you want a third quarterback, you maybe hang on to him. I would be keeping him on my radar in Dynasty, though, because he probably will be that starting quarterback. Still a question there of who's going to win that battle. As for running back, I'm not very high on Rachaad White. He reminds me, I feel like he has the type of ceiling that Jerick McKinnon had for that good stretch last year, a very good receiving back, but you didn't see a ton of rushing ability from Rachaad White. Obviously, they had Leonard Fournette there, so I don't know what the ceiling is right now with Rachaad White when it comes to his rushing ability. His receiving ability is near the top of the charts. A very good running back when it comes to PPR and getting those receptions out of the backfield. Definitely a guy to look out for. Evans and Godwin, I think this year it's the same as always, even without Tom Brady at quarterback. They're high-end wide receiver 2s in my mind. They're just going to be taking touches away from each other. But those 2 guys are the top targets. They're going to be throwing the ball. Of course, accuracy is a problem, like I mentioned with Baker Mayfield, but they're still going to get those targets. They're going to get the receptions. Like I said, high-end to probably mid-tier wide receiver 2s on both of them, I would say. Russell Gage, late-round flyer. I don't think there's a ton just based on the question at quarterback. And like I said, those top 2 guys, Evans and Godwin. When it comes to tight end, stay away from Cade Otton. Keep him on the waiver wire. No need to even come close to him.
Yeah, and I think that Cade Otton's value kind of was created by the fact that Tom Brady loves throwing to his tight ends. And, so for me, yes, I agree as well. Like Cade Otton, I'm probably not going to keep him much longer in Dynasty, just from the sense of that, he's probably not going to get the ball. His value is going to tank. So I would leave him on waivers. And then as far as the receivers go, I mean, for a team that you said was such a downgrade, I thought you were going to be a little more pessimistic than I'm about to be. Evans, week 17, he had 10 catches, 207 yards, 3 touchdowns, and everyone's like, oh my God. That said, he only finished in the top 15 of wide receivers 3 times. That was one of them, and then he finished as wide receiver 1 early in the season with another one mixed in. So for me, I think the top that he can even be is probably one of those low-end wide receiver 2s. I don't see the upside because I don't know how accurate the quarterback is going to be. And yeah, he'll go up and he'll get his, but there'll be a couple weeks that he takes over. I'm not sure he's going to be consistently great. That said, there's rumblings about what his future holds and stuff like that. And we'll get into potential trade talk later in the season. He might not even be there if they start to go into this rebuild, like everyone's kind of saying that they might. The uncertainty really scares me, though, when it comes to Chris Godwin. To me, I'm not sure how much upside he has, because even heading into last season, he was a little bit uncertain of what he was going to be, and take Tom Brady out of the equation too. So I'm not sure how much upside he has in general. To me, I think he's probably a wide receiver 3 with a little bit of upside to be one of those low-end wide receiver 2s also. I think their values are pretty similar. I would put Evans ahead of Godwin, but their values are very similar, kind of like what it was in last year's draft rankings. But then as far as the running backs go, I'm unsure also. I think it's an unknown. To me, Rachaad White, he's a starter. A lot of people are going to undervalue him just based on the offense. I think he could be a running back too, just based on that, but he's probably one of those lower end, if not running back 3. He's probably your third option. I'm not sure that I would be comfortable with him being a second guy. They released Leonard Fournette. They signed Chase Edmonds. Sean Tucker was an undrafted free agent. I'm not sure any of those are going to be much of a factor. Keyshawn Vaughn either. I'm not sure that Edmonds, Tucker, Keyshawn Vaughn are going to have any sort of impact. So therefore, I think Rachaad White still holds value, and I think that a lot of people are going to underrate him. He might be one of those like buy low candidates that you have in dynasty perspective, just based on the fact that you probably could get him for dirt cheap, and he's the number 1 running back on an offense. So an interesting case. And then I'm just, Baker Mayfield and Kyle Trask right now, they're splitting the reps at OTAs according to Todd Bowles. To me, stay for both of them. Just plain and simple, not picking them in dynasty, not picking them in redraft. That's it.
Yeah, that's fair. Looking at, I love your wide receiver talk. With Evans and Godwin right now in Dynasty, are you selling? Are you getting rid of them?
Well, I think it's a little unknown right now, because if Tampa's not good, then they're going to get a top quarterback next year, assuming the draft. And so the value might be there. That said, if Mike Evans gets traded to a different team where there's a quarterback upgrade, then I'm probably holding both for right now, just because I think that the value on them is low. Just, I don't know that I would want to sell them for dirt cheap. Obviously, if you can get something for Evans, then you do it. But at the same time, it's very weird just based on we're really unsure of how they'll do this season with a much downgraded quarterback. And a lot of people are panicking on that. And so therefore, I'm not sure that I would take Mike Evans' value and chop it in a third.
Yeah, that's fair. I stay away almost every year from Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. I don't think I've ever drafted them while they're number 1 and 2 at wide receiver in Tampa. I think this could not be a better year for it in my mind in redraft. Just stay away at this point. You're not, whatever you're expecting, it's going to be less than it. That's all we have to say there.
Yeah, and it's funny because, we'll get into our do not draft list as we start to get into it, but I feel like the last 3 or 4 seasons we've just written Tampa Bay Buccaneers as on that list. And so, yeah, I think you kind of stay away from them this year.
Yeah, completely agree. You have to.
Alrighty, so then we head over to New Orleans, and they got a new quarterback out there in Derek Carr, playing for a team other than the Oakland Raiders, or now the Las Vegas Raiders, for the first time. And Zach, I know that your feelings on Derek Carr, but how is it going to affect the rest of the offense?
So there's the positives about Derek Carr, which is it could be a heavy passing offense, and there's a lot of targets that can be going out with Derek Carr as QB1. When it comes to Derek Carr himself, he was QB 17 last year. He's a solid backup, as always in redraft. Wouldn't take him as your starter. Don't do it to yourself. He's not going to be QB1 numbers. He'll be QB2. You'll throw him in for a week or 2 if one of your guys goes down, or a bye week. He's that kind of quarterback. I think he's a QB2 in Dynasty, though. You're probably super flex league. He's going to be that guy for you. just based on he's going to be the starting quarterback. So you're going to want his points instead of leaving him on the bench. I would hold on to Jameis Winston in Dynasty, just in case something happens to Carr. Obviously, a very experienced quarterback in Jameis. If Derek Carr struggles, Jameis Winston can very easily come in. So hold on to him in Dynasty. End of your bench right now. When it comes to running backs, though, I will be completely honest. I'm super worried this year about Alvin Kamara. Super worried. He was running back 16. He had 4 touchdowns last year. One game, he had 3 of those. Just one game. I mean, that's awful value. Jamal Williams, who's coming in, he had 17 rushing touchdowns. And if you don't think that Jamal Williams is coming in to take all of Alvin Kamara's touchdowns, Alvin Kamara, I'm very worried. I'm probably gonna end up staying away from him throughout this year. I'd hold on to him in Dynasty. I think it's just this year is going to be really bad just based on they have Jamal Williams there. But redraft, I'm staying away from Alvin Kamara. When it comes to wide receivers, I think Olave is a solid flex option right now. But I also think he's definitely someone to watch out for because I think he might fall in drafts. Of course, people value him. There's some people that value him higher than others. But I think there's the opportunity that he falls just based on he's not in that top tier kind of offense in New Orleans. Nothing too crazy about it. So watch out for Olave. Could get some good value if he is your flex option. Michael Thomas, he's a lost cause until he steps onto a football field once again. Taysom Hill, he's a flyer. I wouldn't do anything more than that. Of course, he had a ton of touchdowns in this offense. All of a sudden, he's taken away from Kamara's touchdowns as well. He's a flyer, as always. Juwan Johnson, I think he's a solid backup. He had the 3rd most touchdowns by a tight end last year. Take him as your backup. I mean, you throw him in 1 week or 2 weeks, he could get you a couple touchdowns. That's good enough for you.
Yeah, and I think Juwan Johnson's probably one of those sneaky backups that not a lot of people have on their radar, but he was a top 15 guy last year. And so to me, that's kind of what you want in one of those backup options. They also traded Adam Troutman, which, that helps free him up a little bit too. And so, yeah, Juwan Johnson's an interesting option. Olave, he's interesting as well because he only had 4 touchdowns. So, you figure that improves over 1,000 yards last year. He's a mid to high end wide receiver because I think that they're going to throw a lot to him. And he has the potential he can end up as one of those wide receiver ones when it's all said and done, just based on target share, especially if Michael Thomas goes down, as you just mentioned. And if Michael Thomas is on the field and they're full go, he's probably one of those mid wide receiver 2. But in the case that he's not there, I think that sky's the limit for Olave. They're going to be throwing to him a lot. And he's a guy that, yeah, you could double him, but he's getting open. Like, that's one of his strengths is getting open. And so that, I think, is the argument in favor of Olave. That said, Michael Thomas, he's a potential wide receiver 3, nothing more. And, we'll see what happens as far as his health goes. But, Rashid Shaheed is actually a guy that I would keep my eye on just based on the fact that he might be the number guy. Those games where Olave is getting doubled, triple teamed, then you're probably going to see Shaheed get a ton of targets too. The big question mark for me, though, is the impending potential suspension of Alvin Kamara. He has a July 31st trial date, which is typically when the NFL opens up their training camps. And so, we're not really sure what the NFL is going to have in store as far as suspension goes or whether or not they're going to let Kamara play this season. But there is that risk. So as it stands right now, with Kamara being there in the lineup, he's probably a back-end running back too. I don't know that I would drop him so far below that because he's still Alvin Kamara. He still has that upside. And yes, he didn't have a good year last year. Their line didn't exactly help them either. And so I still think that Kamara holds value. That said, I think that one of the biggest sleepers of this entire fantasy draft, couple months is going to be Jamal Williams. I really think that Jamal is probably one of those guys that if Kamara is not there, he's one of those 6th or 7th round guys that you go up and you grab because he's just going to be a workhorse. And if Kamara's there, you probably even can grab him in the 9th or the 10th round, with Kamara still in the lineup. As you mentioned, he was the goal line guy in Detroit. But to me, the lines that stand out, he carried the ball a league high 41 times inside the 10-yard line, and he had 13 rushing touchdowns on those. You mentioned that he finished with 17 on the year. 13 came from within the 10-yard line. You think back in the last bunch of years where Kamara missed games, it was Latavius Murray and it was Mark Ingram. Those guys would take off in those weeks. I think that Jamal Williams has that kind of potential. And so to me, he could be the sleeper of the draft this entire fantasy draft summer. Kendre Miller, probably worth a late round flyer, but it obviously changes. If Kamara is not there, then you'll probably want to try to take him just because, we're not really sure exactly if Jamal Williams will get a workload outside, receiving work and things like that. But as far as Kendre Miller goes, I would keep an eye just based on the impending suspension or potential not suspension of Alvin Kamara. And then the Carr thing, his interception rate was the highest of his entire career last year. His completion percentage was the lowest of his entire career, or lowest since his rookie year, rather. And to me, he's a backup. He's one of those guys that in Superflex you take, but to me, he's one of those low-end quarterback twos, and I'm not sure that he has much more value because he really has no rushing upside.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. The one thing about Jamal Williams, I agree with you. He's going to be a very heavy sleeper. I got to watch out for based on what happens with Alvin Kamara. And even if they do have Kamara, like you said, Jamal Williams still has that crazy value because of how many rushing touchdowns came last year with him. 17 of them, like you mentioned, 13 inside the 10. The one thing about Jamal Williams, I would, of course, he's a sleeper, but I wouldn't put yourself in a situation where he's your second running back. If you're fine on a sleeper, it's good enough. He could be your third running back, but you can't really, especially if Kamara is there, he should not be your running back too. I know that, he's very likely to get those rushing touchdowns, but you don't want to have to rely on a guy like that because he still is Alvin Kamara. And of course, like I said, I'm staying away from him, but he still has that fantasy value that he can go out for a week. He had 6 touchdowns one week 2 years ago. It just out of nowhere, he can do stuff like that. I wouldn't be drafting Jamal Williams as your running back 2. If you get a running back 3, great option in Jamal Williams.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that it's one of those, a lot of players take their running back in their first 2 rounds. And that's where you would probably try to target, somebody like a Jamal Williams, where you have him in there in the flex option and the potential that you stick him in there as your second running back.
Yeah, I completely agree. Let's move on to the Panthers.
All right. So we got 2 teams left and both of them made high picks in Atlanta and Carolina in this year's draft. Let's start with Carolina here. Bryce Young and a bunch of weapons. And Zach, take it away.
Bryce Young and a bunch of weapons. I mean, this guy is the number 1 quarterback in Dynasty in my mind. I don't have an argument for CJ Stroud or Anthony Richardson ahead of Bryce Young when it comes to Dynasty. This guy should be the first quarterback off the board, no doubt. I don't have a problem with you taking him as a backup in redraft. You could definitely just take a shot on him if he goes off this year, which a little unlikely just based on still young and trying to get used to the NFL. But take him as a backup, hold him on your bench. If he has a great week, then all of a sudden you got a really solid backup quarterback in Bryce Young. When it comes to running back, he's got a really strong running back in Miles Sanders. He was running back 15 last year when he was with Philadelphia. And in a very crowded backfield, I think he again is a solid running back 2 option. He was in a crowded backfield last year and put up those numbers at running back 15. Solid RB2 with Bryce Young as his quarterback. As far as the wide receiver room, Adam Thielen, wide receiver 30 last year. I think he's a solid flex option, maybe a low end wide receiver 2, but not too much there. He is the number 1 option for Bryce Young this year, and he might go to him a lot, but I think this team's going to focus a little more on the running ability and the rushing ability of Bryce Young along with Miles Sanders. I think that's what they're kind of going to focus on this year. But like I said, a solid flex option in Thielen. He was down a tiny bit from a couple of years ago to last year. I'd still have some trust in him. He's going to get those touchdowns. When it comes to Mingo, I'd probably draft him middle of the rounds in Dynasty. A solid option there, maybe second round, third round. Just grab a solid wide receiver and maybe you could build that chemistry with Bryce Young as the years go on. When it comes to Chark and Terrace Marshall, I think they're backups at best, and that's really it when it comes to Chark and Marshall. Carolina barely used their tight ends last year. That definitely stood out. I'd probably stay away from Ian Thomas, and I'd probably also stay away from Hayden Hurst when it comes to redraft value. Maybe if you have him in Dynasty is a solid option, because I think Hurst will probably be the tight end 1, but I don't think there's a ton of value when it comes to Hurst or Thomas in redraft. I think you have better options on the board.
Yeah, I think Hayden Hurst is probably a guy that somebody takes later in the draft. I would stay away from him. He goes from Burrow to Bryce Young, and we're kind of unsure of that. I think there's much better options for you at tight end. But then as far as the wide receivers go, DJ Chark, he had 502 receiving yards, 3 touchdowns on 30 receptions with the Lions. We're not really sure who's the 1, who's the 2, if it's Thielen, if it's Chark. That said, I'm taking Thielen. If I had to pick between the 2, I think he's going to be that red zone guy. Take a chance on the upside. If he scores touchdowns, then that's points, fantasy points. And so I think that for me, if you look at what the rankings right now are, a lot of people are picking Chark before they pick Thielen, and Thielen is going like the 15th round in a lot of these redraft leagues. I think he's ranked higher than that. So if you can grab him in the 12th round even, before that wave, I think that that's a guy that's a really, really good value for Thielen. Take a chance on that upside flex. Mingo, I think he's more intriguing than the rest of the guys there, than Marshall, Laviska Shenault, etc. I think that that's a later round guy that you might want to take in a redraft league. He's probably worth probably like a low second to a high third in a rookie draft, just based on the fact that they did spend some capital on him to get him at pick number 39. He's a big physical guy. And, if all of a sudden he meshes with Bryce Young, he will become one of those red zone threats and score a lot of touchdowns as well. So I think there is some upside there. As far as the running backs go, Miles Sanders, he scored 13 rushing touchdowns this past year. And that comes after the last year previous when I said I never will take him ever again in fantasy after he scored 0 touchdowns in 2021. His carries inside the 10-yard line, it ranked among the top 5 in running backs, which is amazing considering the fact that everybody said, oh, Jalen Hurts is going to take away all the carries. And sure enough, there with Miles Sanders getting a lot of carries. He gets paid 4 years, $25 million. And I think that this is a potential that he could become a full-blown workhorse running back with an expanded receiving role from what he had over in Philadelphia. Right now, I'm probably going to rank him as a low running back 2, though. He has the potential to rank for that higher running back 2 based on the receiving upside. And then as far as Bryce Young goes, we spoke about it a ton in that episode 1 where we went through the draft and each pick. And you guys can catch that episode in our feed. And to me, though, Bryce Young's number 1. He is number 1 in Dynasty. I think that in a super flex league, you can argue that he's probably the second pick behind Bijan Robinson, who we'll get to in a minute. But he should be the first quarterback pick. And, a lot of people right now are pointing at Anthony Richardson over him. the history of the rushing quarterback, the longevity. I think that right now, if I'm putting them in a redraft league, Bryce Young he can be a solid quarterback 2 for you right away. And, you don't really have that concern over injury. I know a lot of people are saying, oh, his size, he's going to get hurt. I don't see that. Bryce Young's a really protective quarterback. He knows how to properly shield himself, and he's been doing it, and he's been taught to do it based on his size. I think Bryce Young, though, probably is a solid level quarterback too.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think it's a mistake if people take anybody else at the top quarterback position in Dynasty. I really do. I think Bryce Young showed you everything that you needed to see while he was at Alabama to tell you that he is the number one guy. And you watch the other guys in college, of course, Richardson struggled a tiny bit while he was at Florida when it came to accuracy. And then CJ Stroud, I talked about decision-making was a bit of a problem, but looking at Bryce Young, he's got to be the number one guy.
Yeah, totally agree. And so now we go to a guy who we know is the number one guy, at least we think we do. It's Bijan Robinson out in Atlanta. And is this the year that Bijan becomes the first overall pick in every rookie draft? And then, we spoke a little bit about redraft, but there's going to be guys that take him number one, right?
Yes, there definitely is. Right now he's the number one pick in Dynasty, especially in a super flex. You got to take Bijan Robinson at number one. Of course, if you need a running back, if not, then you probably trade down. You're going to get great value because a lot of people want Bijan. When it comes to redraft, middle of the first round, I think that's where he slots in. We talked about that on our first episode, just ranking him among those top running backs. I think he's middle of the first round, a pretty solid spot for him. At running back, behind him is Tyler Algier. Stash him. I think Bijan's going to be the number one guy, but you never know what's going to happen. And Algier could be the top guy out of nowhere. Cordarrelle Patterson got some solid touches last year. With Bijan there, though, I think that kind of comes to an end in this offense. Here or there, Patterson can come in for some type of gadget play or who knows what Atlanta can come up with. But it's Bijan's backfield, and that's pretty much it. Looking at quarterback, I'd probably grab Ritter and Heineke in Dynasty. I'd stay away from them completely in redraft. No doubt about it. Just stay away. There's no need. It's going to be Bijan's offense, like I said. At wide receiver, Drake London, I probably put him a wide receiver 3, a flex option, low end wide receiver 2, but mainly a wide receiver 3, just based on the quarterback situation. Not too much trust there in Atlanta just yet. Matt Collins, Scotty Miller, very boom or bust behind Drake London. But the big guy that all the questions are going to be about, that guy at tight end, and that's Kyle Pitts. He finished tight end 33. It's the same coaching staff as last year is the thing that worries me when it comes to redraft. He's a backup right now in redraft. If anything changes, then hopefully you're able to get him if he starts to get hot. You kind of see what happens in Dynasty. I'd hold on to him. He's so young. He's going to be the starting tight end for 10, 15 years to come if he doesn't get traded. Like, he's going to be that number one tight end, that go-to option when they get that quarterback one and that solid option at quarterback. I wouldn't be starting him right now, but you're definitely holding on to him in Dynasty. I wouldn't even sell him because I don't think the value is there.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's probably a guy that you could buy low on even, because I think that a lot of owners are panicked about him or frustrated about him. And so to me, I think that, yes, the future for him is very, very, very high. He's up there. He's a high risk, high reward, I think, at least for this year. And, he's not practicing right now in OTAs. And I think that also kind of leads to, if you're going to trade for him now, don't trade for him in August. But it's a guy who has the potential to be a top 5 guy. And, as you kind of look through their weapons that they have from a pass catching standpoint, there's not much there outside of Drake London. And so, there is the potential that he still could be that. And I'm a little intrigued by that. I would probably say it's, Kelsey, Andrews, Hawkinson, probably Darren Wall be there, Goddard. And then you can probably argue between him and Kittle. I probably would take Kittle, but I would probably put him right after that. Just, you can make the argument. So he's 6 or 7, though, based on whatever you say in that. So he still probably is your tight end one. If you're not the first to the table to grab a tight end, he's a good option to have just based on the fact that I'm not sure how many pass catchers they're really going to be able to utilize this year in that high of a capacity. I'm not sure that Jonnu Smith really adds much, and he didn't really do too much when he was over in New England. But, Pitts, I'm banking on the fact that he's going to be better than he was last year, because I don't know that he could have gotten any worse.
That's fair. Right now for Pitts, I mean, if you're going to draft Pitts, I'd draft a solid backup. You got to draft a solid backup. Maybe draft a backup a little bit higher than you would have wanted to. And then it might work out. You could even draft 2 starting tight ends if you really want to, and kind of roll that way. But I wouldn't be. He's not really near the top for me, and I wouldn't go really any higher than 7th, 8th round, probably. I don't know.
Yeah. And I think that that's probably where he belongs. When that next wave of tight ends all kind of goes, that's probably where I wouldn't by any stretch reach for him any higher than that. But as far as the pass catchers go, Drake London, who I just mentioned, he had a great year, but he really underwhelmed. He was, wide receiver 43. He had the 5th highest target share, though, of any player in the NFL. 2nd highest target per route rate among wide receivers. He was, though, in the last stretch of the season, he was wide receiver 20. He didn't score a touchdown, though, and he was wide receiver 20. So a little bit of upside there. I think in redraft, he's probably a low-end wide receiver 2 at the best, and he's probably in that 6th to 7th round range. There's the potential he could push to the upper level just based on the fact that there's really nobody there other than Kyle Pitts, I think, with the exception of, the dump-offs to the running backs. I think that that's probably another guy you could buy low on for one of those frustrated owners from last year. He had a really good year. He did. And the numbers really don't show that, or the fantasy points don't show that. But at the same time, he had a good year. And so I think that that'll continue to improve, especially as Desmond Ridder gets more comfortable. And then there's the potential that, Desmond Ridder might not be the long-term future there. So grab Drake London now. He showed that he is talented. That said, this is going to be the Bijan show. Just like you said, I think it's going to end up finishing like McCaffrey, Eckler, Bijan. In that order, one of those 3 guys is going to take over. It very well could be Bijan. He's the number 1 pick for me, though, in all the rookie drafts. He's probably worth that mid-first round in the redraft, just like you said. But if you want to grab him in those first couple picks, go grab him. Enjoy the ride, because it's going to be fun, and that's that shiny new toy. I would say make sure, just based on the workload, grab Tyler Algier as your handcuff. Please do it, because Algier was really good. His dynasty value absolutely tanked when they picked Bijan Robinson. So if you do own him in dynasty, and even a Patterson owner, go approach the guy who picked Bijan and say, I want to give you this. Can you give me that? And see if you can somehow get a trade, because otherwise I'm not sure how much value Algier and Patterson have. It's a good person. It's a good strategy, though, if you're willing to just cut them. At least go to the Bijan owner first and say, hey, I have this guy, and can you give me this for him? I think that's probably the approach for those guys. But, as far as Algier goes, I wouldn't pick him as a standalone guy. If you don't have Bijan as a handcuff, I probably would take him, though, if I have Bijan, just based on you want to have that handcuff guy steady. And then as far as the quarterback goes, listen, Ridder is probably one of the weaker starting quarterbacks. He had 4 regular season starts as a rookie. He completed 63% of his passes. He had 6.2 yards per attempt, threw 2 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. So to me, it was okay, but it wasn't anything that was going to blow you out of the water. Oh, we have to get Desmond Ridder. It's going to run very interesting because, again, there's multiple running backs that are going to have to get the ball. You'll see a lot of dump offs, and you'll probably see a lot of those Kyle Pitts, kind of 5-yard over the middle routes. That's where I really think that Desmond Ridder could somehow up his fantasy value. For me, he's a streaming option. There's the chance that he leaps into the top 20 because they're probably also going to make Ridder run a little bit. Just the way that, they draw up those gadget kind of plays that you were talking about with Cordero Patterson. You'll probably see a lot of read options with Bijan also, where they're going to pretend to give it to Bijan and then just kind of have him bootleg the other way, Desmond Ridder. So I think that's where his value is. But to me, he's a streaming option.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and I agree on the Bijan thing. Just go and get Algier right now. The value is very low. Go get him. See what you see. It's probably not going to be a ton, but just to stash him just in case behind Bijan. It happens all the time when a rookie running back's drafted. You got to go get the stash guy and just make sure at the back end.
Yeah, and to remind you, it's June, and so grab them now. Don't grab them in August. If you're making those trades, grab them now while the value is not as high as when it will be as we approach training camp, and all of a sudden a report comes out, oh, Algier's getting a lot of the workload, and then you're like, wait a minute, what's going on here? Algier's value is going up again. Grab him now. His value is probably the lowest it'll be, but just make sure you have that safety net.
Yeah, completely agree. That'll do it.
All righty. And so that'll do it. We went through all the teams. We got the AFC West and the AFC South next week, and then we've hit all 32 teams.
Yeah, big question. Who's going to be the number one option in Kansas City? Ton of targets there. Who's going to be the number one guy for Patrick Mahomes?
Yeah, I might have to think on that one because, it's interesting to say, all the different options he has. And I think the number one pass catcher will be Travis Kelce when it's all said and done.
Good take.
Okay. All righty. So until then, I'll give Zach time to think about his answer before he gets onto it. Next week, we will cover the AFC West and the AFC South. Zach Malman, I'm Brett Malman. This has been Third Round Reversal. We will see you guys all next week.